Warning: the views and opinions expressed in this podcast can be triggering and sensitive in nature for some. The opinions and views within are solely the views of the person expressing them and do not reflect Breaking the Fourth Wall Entertainment, the panel, guests, or the platform it is released on. Listener discretion is advised. You have been warned. Go ahead.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Breaking the Fourth Wall. We're going to be talking about some common ground here. We got a great decision that came in today, or a great discussion that comes with the decision, depending on how you look at it, of the George Floyd case with Officer Chauvin, who was convicted of second-degree murder and manslaughter. And we have a debate that's brewing with this. We've been talking offline about it. Coming in today, coming back to the show, I'm Christopher Scott Rutter, host of What's Your Effing Binge. I also have with me Christopher Stolle, host of Breaking the Fourth Wall, and many other motherfucking shows from Realms of the Mist. We also have Blind Mike, Michael Hunt, and we have the lovely Serenity joining us here today on this panel. We're going to be talking a lot about this. I'm going to come in and try to be a moderator on this, and also playing devil's advocate to whatever point that comes up. So we're going to try to go through this in chronological order, so that way we go point by point, so we can have an intelligent discussion about this from beginning to the end of the case, which just happened now an hour and 6 minutes ago. So we're really fresh off the topic. And this case, of course, goes all the way back until last year of June of 2020, all the way until April the 20th of 2021. So going all the way back to the original arrest, we all saw the original 9-minute and 36-second video of George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe," and going forward. Chris Stolle, what you got, bro?
Before we jump into this, I want to get this out of the way before we jump into this. I have a little bit of business that doesn't involve with the conversation. It was brought to my attention today that I want to be able to send out prayers and, of course, good wishes to a particular family of a little girl named, I'm going to screw this name up, Azalea Diamond Kane. The reason being that I want to send this out from all of us here at Breaking the Fourth Wall Entertainment. It was just brought to my attention that she is only 8 months old and has been battling leukemia, and unfortunately does not have much further to go. So obviously I want well wishes for her as well as her family in this difficult time. I wanted to get that out of the way before we got into the shouting matches. So, you're
absolutely, yeah, all prayers going out to her.
Absolutely.
Leukemia with an 8-month-old, man, fucking God bless her family, man. They got to be fighting and going through that. So anybody who, whenever you watch this video, leave any comments or anything on the comment wall. If you are looking for a way to be able to donate to the family, hopefully Chris might be able to put that up with the post. Some way to be able to get in contact with the family to help them, supposedly.
I'll look into it, see if they've
got there's a GoFundMe, and there's a lot of support coming worldwide, so we could definitely have that link.
Outstanding. Yeah, so we'll make sure that we take a part of that. Anybody who watches the video, please help this family out. A child going through something as horrible as leukemia, man, that's fucking way more heavy than what we're getting ready to discuss, even though what we're going to discuss is pretty fucking heavy.
and of course, if you can't, in this day and age where everybody has tight finances and everything else, if you can't help the family, if you can't donate something like that, I understand, and I'm sure the family would too, but still prayers and good vibes will go a long way. So, just everybody, my heart goes out to this little girl.
Any good comments and everything you could put up.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that was my interruption.
Awesome. So, no problem, bro. Yeah, man. I didn't realize we were going to drop that in there, or else I would have led right the fuck off with that. So yeah, we're talking about George Floyd. So Chris has already had 10 beers. George Floyd and the Chauvin conviction that's going on here. Going all the way back to June of 2020, we saw the original video of 9 minutes and 36 seconds, which obviously there have been videos added to that entire circumstance that showed how Floyd was acting before their arrest, where he was erratic. There have been videos that were shown afterwards, which actually led to the discussion of, was he actually killed in police custody? But what we're going to talk about, mainly going into the Chauvin conviction, because that's what the defense and both the prosecution really hung their cases on, was that original 9 minute and 30-second video that we all saw. So starting off with that, does anybody remember what we were going through last June whenever all of this broke? This is right at the beginning of the pandemic, and all of a sudden here comes all of this chaos from this video. Do you remember where you were whenever this video broke and what we were doing at that point in time, Chris?
Honestly, I don't. I remember like around this time I was dealing with like, you know, getting laid off from my job and worrying about how I was going to pay my child support. As far as the initial break of it and everything else, I remember getting upset looking at social media where people were automatically jumping that it was a racist thing, that a white guy killed a black guy, you know, and stuff like that. And I'm like,
right,
we constantly jump to this. But I have more fresher memories of the backlash that came afterwards from the riots that should have, if there was riots justified, if there was a way to justify riots to begin with, in my mind back then should have been okay in Minnesota where this shit happened, not all the way in my city of Philadelphia, which had nothing to do with the situation. But yet the looting and the burning and the rioting and the racial divide spread throughout the whole entire country over this without any facts even being available to the case yet. That I remember more than
the fact that it reverberated across the country so quickly. So there was so much venom and so much vitriol attached to this entire case within a 24-hour news cycle, and then it didn't leave anybody's consciousness for basically the next year. Here we are. It's almost exactly a year later, and the vitriol and the separation or the lines in the sand that has been drawn by people on both sides of the discussion has not changed. That separation that started in the country at the beginning of the pandemic. You and I were both at the same time going through losing our jobs, going through this oh shit fucking moment. We didn't have the PPE payments in place for unemployment. Both of us were like, I don't even know how the fuck we're going to feed our families. As a matter of fact, we were in the middle of actually recording. We were doing a D&D segment at that point in time. And we were in the middle of, it was one of the weekends that we were recording a segment for that. And it was like, have you seen this fucking shit, man? Like, what's going on? And you're like, man, we have civil unrest going on. There's tanks rolling down the street in Philadelphia. And there was like a couple weeks later, there was a huge rally that was going on here where I was. And I told my wife at the time that, you know, I'm going downtown. I'm going where the riots are supposed to be happening because I will not allow people coming into my city and fuck my city up. And she was like, totally fucking, you can't go down there. What if something happens? Blah, blah, blah. Serenity, you're out there in Denver and shit was fucking going on. Blind Mike, we weren't talking to you at the time, but I remember all of this distinctly. The discussions we were all fucking having while all this shit was going on.
So what happened?
I know
when
you
went
did.
to the riots?
You and I both were the only.
Yeah, that's what I want to find out. When you went to the riots, Serenity, what did you see personally?
You know, I have to say that I made a lot of friends there. It was a friendly environment between the people, but it was the police and the SWAT and military that was around that they were very violent towards. So, I mean, I ended up getting shot at with rubber bullets that night because I stayed to the very end, and it was pretty insane, but I also don't think that it was really called for. It was just something that I felt like I needed to be involved in. It was a peaceful protest, so it wasn't super bad, but there wasn't any loitering going on at that point either.
And seeing here in Florida, if I remember correctly, I don't think there was really any protesting going on here in Florida whatsoever. If there was, it was really peaceful because I didn't hear any negativity whatsoever.
The experience that I had here where I live at, whenever I went down to the protest and everything that went on, I stayed in the back of the crowd. There was obviously a lot of speakers and everything there, part of the Black community and everything. And the one thing that I have that's different than from Serenity and her situation, where I know that they fired into the crowd with the rubber bullets and the gas and all that other bullshit. The one thing that I had going for me is I'd been locked up with a lot of people that were there. And they were like, Chris is cool, blah, blah, blah. Like they all kind of like stood around me to make sure nothing would happen to me. And I was there to stand in the back to make sure nobody fucking did any of that Antifa bullshit or anything like that. I'm not letting that was my thought process. I'm not letting anybody come into town and fuck up the town that I grew up in. And all of the people that were there, they all rallied around me. And at that time, like whenever, what I was talking about with Chris, that we were like, how are we going to feed our fucking families? Everybody was really panicking. I had taken a job at a liquor store, and everybody came into the liquor store that knew that I was down at that rally. And they were like, thanks for coming. Glad to see you were there and all of this other stuff. I had a huge outreach from a lot of these people. They all knew me beforehand because I'd been in the system and everything with a lot of people, either sons or brothers or whatever. And a lot of them knew who I was. And the ones who didn't know who I was were just cool that I was there. So I didn't have a bad experience either. It was a peaceful protest. People were worried about Antifa being in town or BLM was there to start up shit or whatever the case was. My thought was to hang in the back and just make sure that nobody fucking started shit. That was my idea of it. So I remember that weekend that all of this broke out, and then the video started really getting dissected. And I believe, Chris, you and I, we both, Gotcha. We both had discussions about the video. Like, can you believe this shit? How this has sparked everything going on across the country. This is being felt in your backyard in Philadelphia. This is being felt in Southern Indiana. Serenity, we had a couple spot discussions with you. It's in Denver. We know a couple people out in LA. We had an advocate for the show at that time who lived in Southern California. And he's like, oh yeah, shit's off the fucking wall out here. And so we had a lot of different points of views going on where everything was sparking from this one central location in Minnesota. And this is at the beginning where everybody's in full on panic from the pandemic starting and nobody knowing what was going to happen. The news reports were, we're going to lose 5 million people in the next year or whatever the case is. Everybody's going to be infected. We all might turn into fucking zombies. And we had no toilet paper, you motherfuckers. And then
which to this day still confuses me. I don't understand the toilet connection.
Yeah, I don't. And it's going on again. Actually, me and Shannon were at Sam's just a couple weekends ago, and the toilet paper aisle was cleared fucking again. I was like, really? We're starting this all over again? I thought everybody learned their lesson.
It's funny.
There's enough toilet paper. Stop this.
It's funny.
Yeah, I got stuck with the one ply. What the hell?
It's funny you guys are dealing with that. All the stores I go to, like there's a run on cat food. Every store we go to get cat food for my cat, the aisles are wiped. It's like, what are we eating cat food now? Or we give up on Scrapple? Meow Mix works well enough. I don't know. I'm not lying.
Well,
every store I go to,
it's a reusable toilet.
So before we start. Right. And that's whenever the sales of bidets really started fucking going through the roof. Mm-hmm. But before we move on to the next part of the conversation.
Before we go to the next part of the conversation, commercial break.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys. I think Rudder's iPhone may have froze up a little bit. We will be back in a few minutes after this word from our sponsor of Comic Collections out of Feasterville, Pennsylvania, and we'll get into the heat and heavy of it. But until then, we'll be right back.
Hi, this is Dave from the Comic Collection at 83 Bustleton Pike in Feasterville, Pennsylvania. Our phone number is 215-357-3332. We are right next to Northeast Philadelphia. We have action figures, gaming, statues, albums, and CDs, graphic novels, other knickknacks, and, of course, comics. Established in 1985, we are your go-to store. come by and say hello, and say that the guys from RadioCast FM Radio sent you. The address again is 83 Bustleton Pike, Feasterville, Pennsylvania, or call 215-357-3332.
Thanks everybody out there for listening to us pay the bills. Welcome back to another episode of Breaking the Fourth Wall. And just to recap everything, we're talking about the beginning of what brought us into this entire situation. We're going back to June of last year, talking about June 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. People were losing their jobs. Chris and I were in the lurch. Serenity was out in Denver going, what the fuck, and getting real high, trying to figure shit out. Blind Mike, of course, was blind.
He didn't see none of it coming.
He obviously didn't see any of this coming.
Yeah,
but
I was the blind spot in the corner.
So now we're starting to look at actually how these facts are starting to be presented to the public. And depending on what media outlet that you're looking at, you're seeing the video in an entirely different way. Some media outlets were showing the entire 9 minutes and 36 seconds. Some media outlets were only showing the 20-second excerpts where he says, "Mama." The others were showing the 2 or 3 times. I believe it's actually counted in the video where it was either 11 or 12 times he said, "I cannot breathe." They showed each one of those stop moments. So depending on the media outlet that you're watching, you're able to see all of these different points of views, which caused even more inflammatory reactions across the country. And people were starting to have discourse about how all of this is actually taking place. Was this right? Was this wrong? And then we started having to talk about defunding the police, de-escalating police presence in all of these different places. So going into all of this, now that we've all had this past year to really digest that whole first 9 minute and 30-second video, let's start with Stolle here. What now that you've been able to see it and actually see it presented in a factual way from beginning to end multiple times, obviously by this time all of us who have seen it, we've seen it probably a dozen times. So now that you've seen it that many times, what was your initial reaction to it, and has that changed in the past year coming up to today's decision?
The only way I can answer that is I have to put some things involved to it. I can't just turn around and say,
go ahead.
I am. I can't just say that I had one point of view in the beginning and another point of view at the end, because from the beginning to end, I had one point of view that was there. Is why are they only showing the cell phone cam? What is taking so long on the body cams? Because it did take forever for the body cams to come out. When the body cams came out, they did kind of change my point of view at first. At first, my initial point of view from the cell phone cams was, okay, this cop was negligent. This cop was aggressive. I still don't see racism involved with it, but I'm seeing, I'm seeing that he's definitely not caring about the safety of the suspect. Okay, and that was my point of view for the longest time until finally the body cams came out. And when the body cams came out, that's where my questioning began. First off, the heartlessness in me, and I will admit that it's heartlessness in me, turn around and said the simple phrase, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Okay. George Floyd was what was the report? 4 times the lethal amount of fentanyl in his system, which scientifically proven fentanyl disrupts respiratory. It could kill you just by one dose, whether off how much he had in his system. And he was out of his mind high. I don't mean high like he's laughing at tree noises. He's out of his mind high. Resisting arrest in every way, shape, or form, not complying with the officers for a full 10 minutes before they wound up at the back of the car, before the whole incident that we saw in the 9-minute video. Of course he's going to wind up in this situation. So I started at that point I started having reasonable doubts about this being a motivated or aggressive action by the cop, and started leaning more towards involuntary manslaughter, that he did not intend for George Floyd to get hurt. He especially didn't intend for George Floyd to die. But George Floyd escalated the situation to the point where it went to that that unfortunate end. And that was really where my point of view changed. And today, I still stand by it was involuntary manslaughter. I do not see murder in this.
Okay, and Serenity, for you, because we've had a lot of different discussions over the past year, and this has come up a couple of different times, and you went to the original protest and everything that were happening there in Denver. Did your point of view change with any of the new video that came out, like what Chris is talking about? And then also, let's not forget about the pre-footage that came from the camera from the storefront where all of it happened, showing the first 6 or 7 minutes before the cops arrived on scene, showing how erratically he was behaving. Let's not forget that part of it either.
I don't think I've ever seen that footage, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that.
Yeah,
that I've heard about it.
So there's a video that shows 6 minutes and 36 seconds of whenever the police were called to scene of him being out in front of a storefront, being a little bit out of his mind, referring to what Chris is saying about him being out of his mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the whole fentanyl and being high out of your mind and it. Yes. Yeah, he was dropping things, picking them up, talking incoherently and everything. This was all caught on video, and it didn't come out until this trial, and it wasn't actually submitted as evidence. But to the point of what Chris is talking about, being high out of your mind, fentanyl and the other stuff that he was on, which is methamphetamines. He was also on Oxycontin and everything. What they consider to be lethal doses also has to be tempered a little bit with tolerance. So what may be a lethal dose for one person is just being really high for the next person because he's taken it so much. But that doesn't excuse any of that, those actions. But Serenity, did any of your view change on it?
Not really. I mean, I watched all the videos in the beginning, and all I saw is that a life was taken. I didn't really change my decision on that because it was reality that a life was taken. It's just what were the means behind his life being taken. No, I don't think it was right. And yeah, I think people had a right to be upset. I just don't think it should have been some worldwide protest that ended up costing like billions of dollars because they wanted to make a point, you know?
Gotcha. And Blind Mike, for you, with everything that you were hearing with all of this going on, I don't know how I don't know how evident everything was for you to see, but with what you were able to capture, so that way, and what you were listening to, was there anything that changed for you?
Well, we're going to go to the cell phone footage camera first, and yes, you can only see one point of view. When it came to that camera, when the body cams came out, you could see everything else. So, in my opinion of this whole thing, Floyd, he did it to himself. I mean, he resisted arrest. He played the game. He was agitated. He said he couldn't breathe for 5 minutes, and this is before he even was laying on the ground with a knee on his neck or whatever that you want to call it. But he was claiming to not be able to breathe right. They had him in the back of the police car. He was claiming he couldn't breathe. So they let him out of the back of the police car. They tried to settle him down, but they couldn't. And when that other officer showed up and put the knee on the throat or the shoulder or wherever you want to say, since I can't see it myself, I say that George Floyd did it to himself. And yes, it might be sad that somebody passed away, but it doesn't give anybody any reason to riot or be upset that this occurred. If somebody does not resist arrest, then none of these incidents would even happen. Be arrested, get handcuffed, go in the back of the car, shut up, do what you're supposed to do, and then you can deal with it later. But when you resist arrest, accidents can happen, and that's exactly what happened. So I really do believe that riots should not have occurred. People really need to mind their own business, and let the cops and the department deal with the situation the way it went. I mean, again, no riots. I just don't think there should have been any riots.
Quick counterpoint or quick add-on to what Mike said.
Chris. Yeah.
I agree with what Mike said completely, but to the listeners, I want to make a point to you guys. At this point, nobody here is in any way, shape, or form, although we may not agree with some other people's viewpoints of those videos. In no way, shape, or form are we saying that just because we think, George Floyd brought this on himself, we're not justifying death. Okay, nobody wanted to see George Floyd die. Nobody wanted to. I don't even believe the cops wanted to see George Floyd die. So in that aspect, we are not defending death. We are analyzing the actions. I just wanted to make that point very clear to people. We're not just because we're saying George Floyd brought it on himself does not mean we are justifying death.
Death, correct.
Yeah,
to be quite honest, it's not even.
Hopefully, that'll become right, and hopefully that'll become evident with the series of events that we're getting ready to go through, defining each one of them. I do think it's an interesting point to take from this, that 3 people who were able to watch the videos clearly and make their own impersonation, whereas one person who was mostly able to listen to what was going on, all came away with different takeaways. I'm really curious about with Mike, like what your beginning and ending impersonation stayed the same. That was your impersonation from the very beginning based on what you heard, right?
Uh-huh. Yes.
Okay. All right. And everybody else has a little bit of a different take because they were seeing it. So I think that goes to really show something, the visceral reaction that everybody will have whenever you're able to not only see and hear something versus just hearing it in a factual presentation. Because Mike's point of view and his takeaway from it from the very beginning seems to be quite different than all of ours.
Well, I think there's also I also think there's some context into it that Mike, and I shouldn't say this in this type of standpoint, but blessedly Mike was able to be ignorant of when a black person watches this video or these videos, and they're already riled up by the race baiting of the mainstream media and everything else. They're looking at it as a white man killed a black man or a white cop killed a black victim, right? When we're looking at it, we're already riled up from the race baiting and everything else going, I'm not seeing this racial divide. I'm not seeing what is causing the hate between black and white people. We were seeing
and Mike
this
Mike seems to be the one.
You know what I mean?
Sorry, Chris. Go ahead, bro.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
I was just thinking that it seems that Mike's point of view or his sensory reference of this seems to be the one where he had a clear drawn conclusion based on the facts that were presented to him, what he heard and what he was able to understand from it. Even though I know, Mike, you're not completely blind. We all know that and we make jokes. But at the same time, your
No, he is blind now. The degenerative disease did take away all his sight.
It did take away. So your impression of all of this is sensory voided from it. It's more of a presentation from which media outlet you took it from, and just the clear presentation of facts, not the sight or sound of things, the way it was presented to you. And you came away with an immediate different reaction than the rest of us.
Well, I did do some research.
I think that says a lot.
Yeah, I also went to YouTube. I looked for that the webcam footage, the body cam footage. I also listened to the outlets as well. And my opinion is that, yes, someone died, and because of the incident, but I'm not going to sit there and riot if the situation was reversed, if it was a black man did that to a white man, because nobody's rioting when they see cops get killed every day, when there's white cops everywhere. And again, it's sad. I'm not condoning it, but it's not my place or my business to be rioting, because justice will be served, and in either way it's going to serve. But you're right, I actually knew only of the story as in what I could hear and what people have told me and what I've actually learned on the news. So that is my complete outlook of the whole thing, because I can't see the hands in the pocket like you guys were talking about earlier, or the time frame that people were throwing up on the screen, things like that. So that stuff I could not see.
I think I think that that's a very interesting takeaway before we go into the rest of the discussion. The one person who is handicapped by sight was only listening to the facts and took away from it just the pure human definition of it, instead of being invoked by any kind of emotion because of what they saw. I think that there's something to be said about that. And there's kind of the Lady Justice that we all know who's blindfolded. We have one person on the panel who actually sees it that way.
I could throw another. Excuse me. I could throw another wrench into the works here. Yourself, Rudder, and myself, and Serenity are all white, pure white. Maybe some Native American ancestry somewhere, but for the most part.
What am I?
If I remember correctly, you do have Hispanic background, so you technically do classify as a person of color. Am I not correct on that?
My dad is a complete redneck, and my mother is definitely has some Hispanic in her.
So I mean, he could even look at this through the eyes of a person of color. As
if he chose to take it that way, he could definitely take it. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so that's very interesting. So now we're going past the dissemination of this video, and this is the initial shock value of the video. Then by now, we're going into August or whatever, and all of the media outlets are showing the full 9 minutes and 30 seconds, even though they're applying opinion to it and everything else. And we're able to see the body cam footage hasn't come out yet. And at this time, we've already gone through some rioting. Some severe rioting. Mm-hmm. Serenity, you guys there in Denver, you saw some fucking horrendous shit. Chris there in Philadelphia, you had tanks rolling through the street, National Guard. Here in Indiana, we had bad shit happen in Indianapolis. And now we're coming into the point in time where we also have the Nashville explosion. Mm-hmm. There's not very many facts coming out about this. It's almost like this is a back burner issue. We have a couple of other killings that happened within the nation between cops and a couple of black young men, and which adds more fuel to the fire. And they're not coming out with any more facts. And we're all able to just talk about this 9 minutes and 30 seconds, talking about it from a point to point or beginning to end of just that video that we were only able to make a decision on at that point in time. Did anybody besides me see something that was actually excessive force?
I didn't see anything excessive force, but I did see a lot of excessive media coverage to specifically George Floyd. You had mentioned that there was other police-involved shootings considered, against black victims or stuff like that, and of course the Nashville thing. And like you said, those dropped off when they first happened. Like the Brown case, for example. Oh my God, another white cop killed a black guy. Let's riot, and it started the racial tensions again. And then all of a sudden they shut up when it was proven that it was justified. That it was a clean and justified shooting. I mean, that Brown case started the whole hands up, don't shoot nonsense. But once it was shown justified, that the cop was justified and it was a clean shooting, there was no apology. There was no, oh, we made a mistake. They literally just dropped it into the ethosphere, and then went back to the George Floyd thing, because the narrative had to be whites are killing blacks and white cops are especially killing blacks. And they were pushing the racial narrative whether it was there or not, which is why I question it every time I see it. So as far as like what you were saying about like an aggressive push from like a physical standpoint of the case, no, not really. I didn't see much of it, but I did see a media push to try to keep everybody angry.
There was definitely some fanning of the flames going on there. Like you said, the arms up, don't shoot case with, and obviously this year in history, Floyd is going to be at the top of this list as far as the headlines go. Brown is going to be a footnote because the body cam footage did show that it was justified, although heinous. It was actually justified because of the rules of engagement during that kind of encounter with somebody who's a known felon.
Right.
So that's what really diminished that effect, and it was out of the news cycle fairly quickly. It was only around for a couple of weeks, but in the background, we still have the whole George Floyd matter going on.
Right.
So, and then we come into the Nashville bombing, And now all of a sudden we're starting to hear more stuff about the George Floyd case, and they're starting to actually dissect the video of George Floyd second by second, because they're setting up the state's prosecution and also the defense of how this case is going to go down, because we're coming into January and February whenever the court proceedings are going to start. So whenever I'm looking at the video, and I'm looking at this purely from a BJJ standpoint, for anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, I'm not talking about blowjobs. I'm talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Anybody who actually practices or instructs this, what is being applied is what's called a knee darce. Whenever it is being instructed, which in the police forces doesn't even actually happen at the SWAT level. At the military level, it does get taught. But whenever it's being instructed, it's about a 10-second application before somebody taps out. If that move is put on you where your hands are restrained, normally a person would be on the ground in side guard, constraining your wrist, called what we call homie wrist control, and your knee would be across the person's throat. This is a very advanced move if you have hand control, but due to the fact that he was handcuffed, it was very easy for Chauvin to put on him by putting his knee across his neck. But that hold is about a 10-second submission. The fact that it did go on for that long period of time shows me, A, that he was taking advantage of something that he saw in a video and didn't know its actual application, or something that he was taught and he knew what the outcome would be. This person would be incapacitated.
I think there's a third factor. I do think there's a third factor.
Okay,
you may be right that he saw it on a YouTube video and it's like, oh, I could do that, and he applied it wrong. But you also have to take in consideration heat of the moment. And that's something I take in, again, going back to the fact of how unruly George Floyd was up until this moment. When you're in a
valid point.
That's a valid point. When you're in a fight and you're in a situation, and I know this as somebody who has military background training. I was a professional wrestler. I'm also Taekwondo trained. So I know how to hand-to-hand combat. But I do know in the heat of the moment, sometimes training does lax into the situation. And in this particular situation, after everything he was dealing with George Floyd, he may have just, for lack of a better term, applied it wrong.
No, okay. There's no way, because his body position is perfect. And then when he leans back and puts his hand in his pocket, that's a completely trained move to change the center of balance in order to put more pressure where he wanted it. So you can't tell me he did it wrong, because he did it so right that it was deadly.
So that is my devil's advocate point of view on that. Serenity is correct. The way that he did position his hands in his pockets and lean back is the proper way to bring your entire front of your calf or your shin bone across the side of somebody's neck. Although part of it is applied onto the shoulder, that's part of the restraint as well. That's why it's called a darce, because you're incorporating both the shoulder and the neck restriction. Okay, so you're limiting the person's ability to move, because the shoulder is a point of leverage. That's how you're actually able to maneuver yourself and gain momentum to get out of a move. And the knee being across the side of his neck, even though it wasn't on his throat, is laying clearly across his carotid. So he may not have been fully trained to understand the fact that it only takes 30 seconds to incapacitate a person in that position. But he continued it.
So basically, from what I heard as well, is that these people, as in Floyd and the officer, had dealings in the past as well. They knew each other.
That is true.
There was three other meetings that these two had.
Yeah, so maybe the cop knew, how to relax Floyd, because maybe he met with Floyd before when he was agitated, drugged up before. So maybe he wasn't trying to kill Floyd. Maybe he was just trying to get him to relax.
So are we saying that he used excessive force before and he got away with it?
No, I think I get what Mike is saying is with the prior dealings, who's to say Floyd wasn't out of control before, and that the officer turned around trying to apply tactics that had worked before on subduing Floyd, and again just goes back to did it wrong or A little too
again,
zealous in the application of.
Again, I'm gonna play devil's advocate on this. I know exactly where you guys are going with this, and I understand it. But 2 out of 3 of the other altercations these two had, 2 of them happened in a nightclub where they did not go to ground and people separated them from fighting. So you can't say he subdued him in those other situations. He did not know this from experience. That was testified on.
So mine was just a theory because, like I said, I couldn't see the footage from other.
Right.
So mine was just a theory because I knew they knew each other from other, like you said, nightclub and the other places.
Yeah.
Although you bring up a valid point. You bring up a valid point of how I personally don't see this as racially motivated or premeditated or intended of murder, because of the simple fact of, unless this guy is a complete and utter idiot, which I'm not going to argue the point because he probably is. But to this point, if I was this guy and I had constant dealings with George Floyd and his criminal activities, the last thing in the world I'm going to want to do is kill him or put myself in a position where he winds up getting hurt or killed, because those previous encounters could come back, as they did, and bite me in the ass. So again,
okay, and then that right there is that's been laid out and it was testified on, and 2 out of the 3 encounters they got separated by other people in the club. One of the instances, Chauvin was actually working as security. The other one, he was actually called because George Floyd was causing a problem at the club. He was called on the scene because of George Floyd.
Right.
He had an actual confrontation with him, but it was separated because he showed up not in uniform. The third instance that happened, he did have to restrain him. So then we go into, not in this jiu-jitsu style of mode. He was able to have 2 other officers on hand, restrain his hands, and cuff him. Okay, so they did not take him to the ground and they did not choke him out. So that's the only problem I have with Stolle's point of view on this, other than maybe he was not trained enough in this situation to understand that he was using that excessive force. Someone who is truly trained in this BJJ move, even with the use of handcuffs, would know that in 30 seconds, this person isn't responding. I've choked him out. Somebody who is trained, somebody who has seen this as a way to take advantage of a situation or a way to subdue somebody severely would not understand the fact that you're killing this guy because you weren't trained.
Counterpoint.
That's the difference. Go ahead, bro.
Just one counterpoint to something you said. You said where you disagree with my point of view in this statement of the jiu-jitsu move and everything else. I am not giving a point of view. I'm actually just speculating and throwing out what ifs, because I don't have anything to back that on. It's literally what if it was this or what if it was that. So I just wanted to make that clear.
You're playing devil's advocate on that part.
Right. I just wanted to be clear. I wasn't giving a point of view. I was giving speculation.
Cool. Yeah. And so then that moves us into the next part with Chauvin, where the facts start coming out about him, that this guy has a jacket. This guy has an incident report, indictments against him, accusations of misconduct. His 16 years on the force, he had 19 charges pressed against him. And you're talking about the fact, and we had this discussion before we went on air, so I kind of want to go through it a little bit. 19 charges in 16 years in a precinct in Minneapolis that is not crime-ridden, where you're talking on average more than 1 charge a year against a cop. At what point in time do we as a country start looking at the people who have taken an oath to protect and to serve, that if there's smoke, there's fire? People who have this kind of a misconduct problem, there has to be like a national registration of bad cops. And at what point in time do they fall into it? And is this guy not one of them?
I will agree with you on the National Registry of Bad Cops, and that people, that's what IA is supposed to be doing in these departments and divisions and everything else. But I will stand by what I stated off air between you and I when we were discussing with it and everything else that context matters. Yes, there may not be a bad neighborhood as you and I would describe it in Minneapolis, as opposed to your worst neighborhood would still be the suburbs of my worst neighborhood or whatever the case may be.
Right. Yeah.
But
we're not measuring dicks on it. We're just looking at the crime rate of where he worked.
But I think context matters. If he's got 19 chits in his jacket and yet had never lost his badge, was it because the department was covering him up, or were they resolved because it was all drug addicts he arrested that didn't like the fact that he took away their fucking baggies? Like their context does matter. Just saying that he's got a complaint in his jacket does not mean that the complaint wasn't resolved or proven falsified.
Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
I was just saying it doesn't mean that he's a bad cop. If just because there are charges brought against him from other felons or other people that they've arrested, like Chris said, they've just been upset and they wanted to press charges. I mean, again, it doesn't mean he's a bad cop, but it doesn't mean he wasn't a bad cop either.
Right.
That we
right.
Know.
And
on
one
average,
of the things.
How many do police officers have? Like, what's the average complaint?
That's a good question.
So Stolle and I were talking about this, and I threw out a number, and I've only heard it a couple of times, and I'm looking it up on Google right now to actually see. So that way I don't want anybody to fact check us and say that we're being fucking idiots over here.
Well,
but
while you're looking it up, I will say that.
I said that.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say while you were looking.
Go ahead, bro. I'm looking it up.
While you were looking it up, I would say that from people that I know that work in law enforcement, my family included, it happens a lot. Simply somebody who didn't like the fact that they got caught running away from the officers, or as an example I gave, they took away their drugs that they just spent $100 on, and they turn around and try to claim excessive force or wrongful arrest or profiling is a big one, especially here in Philly. It happens more often than you would think against cops, and more often than not, it's proven unjustified. It's not true.
So according to the national statistic on this is showing that per capita, 4.6 cases are lodged against 1,000 police officers per 4-year period.
So that puts him in the right spot then. He was an officer for 16 years. That puts him in the right spot, basically, because he was an officer for 16 years.
No, that's 4.6 cases per 1,000 officers in 4 years.
Okay.
Actually, yeah. So he's excessively high.
He's one officer and had
4 to 6 cases per officer. Never mind. But yes, I see what you're saying. Go ahead.
That's the national average. Okay, so the national average shows that he is far above that, and so what this case is brought to the forefront, or what is an abnormal for these kinds of cases, is so many cops came forward, and we've heard in the news how they're talking about all of these cops came forward and they broke the blue wall.
Good.
The blue wall is a real thing because there is misconduct. There are cops who go over the line. There are cops who go over that are overzealous. There are cops who were hall fucking monitors in fucking grade school, got fucking beat up and bullied, and now that they have a badge and a gun, everyone must fucking pay.
Mm-hmm.
You ever see the TV show The Shield? There are real cops like that on forces. It's on. The show is
real
fiction.
Cops like that.
The show is fiction, but it's based on cops that are dirty and hide behind their shield.
Yeah, and just because some cops are dirty doesn't mean all cops are dirty. And
no, not at all. I'm saying this guy is the 1 percentile, not the 99 percentile. I'm saying he's the 1 percentile. So, and like what Stolle said before, that's what IA is supposed to be doing, internal affairs for everybody who's not following. That's what they're supposed to be doing. But the problem is they're not a national organization. They're precinct to precinct, department to department. It's not a national registration.
So it basically sounds like this guy was protected by his own department.
Exactly. And the only reason this police chief came onto the stand and talked about it, this guy was just elected 3 years ago. He's not the police chief who has oversaw Chauvin for 13 of his 16 years on the force.
Yeah.
Well, see, in that aspect, it breaks down to this isn't it is Chauvin's fault for if he was, and I don't know. I don't have the evidence in front of me as far as each chit is concerned. But if he was as aggressive as it looks like on Jacket, this is not just a failure on Chauvin's behavior terms. It's not just his district or his police chief. It is literally the city and the state government's failure for not addressing this and handling it before he became somebody who could be capable of harming a suspect or an innocent.
And so to go back to what you go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, so just because you do have one crooked cop or a few of them or whatever you want to call them, I still don't think you should be defunding the police departments all around the nation and all that.
No, not at all.
Because all you're going to do, you're gonna give the criminals a little bit more power than what they deserve, and it's just so just get out the criminals. Just get the cops out that need to be out. And
in Portland, look at what they did, and now they're begging for the cops to come back. Because but the defending argument, we'll get to that here in a minute because that leads into the line of questioning that we're getting ready to go into. But whenever you're dealing with a community who's sworn to oath to protect and serve, we can't always just say, well, a bad apple doesn't make the bunch. We have to get rid of bad apples.
No, absolutely. But with the ideas of defunding the police, for example, statistically, for every bad cop, there's 100 good ones. And
that's what I'm saying. He's the 1%, not the 99. He's the 1%.
You do need to get rid of the one bad, but you need to keep the other 100 good.
Yeah, and that's the reason the Brown case.
Because you can't get rid of the one bad because, like you guys said earlier, the officers broke the blue code, basically going against their own code and putting this guy behind bars. But you're never really going to find anybody else to break that code unless something happens like this again.
Well, see, the problem is, Mike,
and that's
Mike, and all four of us here can testify to this because we've all had like dealings in pro wrestling, for example, as a perfect example. And we had our own codes. We had our codes of silence for kayfabe and everything else. And for the most part, all of us have kept that in our own fashions. Even to this day, even though all of us are long since retired from the ring. But the thing is that in our profession in entertainment, the code harmed nobody for us to keep. In civil service duties, like law enforcement, like fire department, like EMTs, for example, there's no excuse for this code. Because if you're protecting somebody who's bad on the streets, then you are protecting somebody that is going to harm innocents and also the departments you work for. That's a cancer in the locker room, as we called it.
That's the main point. And before we get off topic, just so everybody knows, I still consider kayfabe to be the greatest American art form ever. But second of all,
fuck you, Vince McMahon, for ruining it.
That's right, cocksucking Vince McMahon. But that's the reason the Brown case went out of the news cycle so quickly, because they did not have a bad apple in that recording.
Right.
No, and that's
if there was a bad
yes.
If there was a bad apple in that recording, or here's another thought for it. Why not, if somebody's body cam footage is no longer available, or they didn't have their body cam footage if they didn't have their body cam turned on, why can't we automatically look at that person as trying to hide or suppress facts for a bad arrest?
I think we should. In those aspects, I absolutely think we should. The whole reason for the body cam, a lot of people think that the body cam is so that way it protects the victim. It doesn't. It protects the arresting officer.
It protects the officer, exactly.
Right. If you don't have it on, you're hiding something.
Exactly. And in this case, the body cam footage did not come from Chauvin.
No, but it came from everybody else around. We had body footages of the other officers. Of course, we had the phone cameras that were heavily spliced by certain news outlets to push a narrative. Yeah, so I mean...
Yeah, depending on which news outlet you're looking at, they edited to make their narrative look better, So going forward with that, now you've got these 19 counts in 16 years. You've got these 3 other incidents. You come into a situation where the guy is cuffed, pulled out of the car, and excessive force is used on him. To anybody who has a trained eye, it is beyond excessive force. It is deadly force. So the judge made the ruling going into the case that the verdict that must be returned first and foremost is murder at what degree along with manslaughter. And the burden of proof was put on the state. They have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And they held all that.
But I think your wording proves my initial point that we were talking about before on air, before going on air, is that the judge came back and says these are the charges that have to be pressed. You're automatically influencing the jury. Let the charges be read and let the jury do it the way they're going to do it. If you tell them you have to say guilty to this and this, if you say guilty to this, you're influencing the outcome.
Well, have any of you ever heard the term jury prudence?
I heard it, but I'm not familiar with what it would mean.
Okay. It's actually part of the Fifth Amendment. It is the right of anybody who goes to a capital trial to bring up the fact that the judge influenced the jury's decision. It is something that everybody who goes to a jury trial has the right to invoke, because the judge automatically mandated a skewed outcome. You have to rule in the favor of murder. You have to rule in the favor of manslaughter. Okay. That is called jurisprudence tampering, and it's part of the Fifth Amendment. And very few lawyers or very few people actually use it.
Go ahead, Serenity. You were going to ask something.
What gets to me about this is the charges that were brought against him is felony murder, which they put it down as involuntary murder, basically, like he didn't intend to murder him.
Then which in Minnesota is second degree. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And then the third degree charge, which also led you to believe that he didn't voluntarily mean to kill him. And then the manslaughter charge, which is obviously his intent wasn't to kill him. So I don't think they really gave a verdict on whether he meant to kill him or not. It was just whether his actions led to his death, and they decided was guilty.
Which is the exact definition of the charge involuntary manslaughter, which is your.
But that's different from state to state, Chris. That's the one thing, because in Florida they actually have aggravated intent, or they actually have second degree murder without intent, or manslaughter with or without intent. It's different from each and every state. They all have different definitions of first, second, and third degree murder and manslaughter.
Okay, then we're automatically pointing out the fact that there's a break in the system, that you could have in each state or each city. A charge means something completely different from one other. If I get charged with second degree murder in Philadelphia, that meaning is completely different from second degree murder in Indianapolis. That's stupid. That's not correct.
Well, in Indiana, if you commit first degree or capital, we don't have capital cases in Indiana, but if you do commit first degree murder, life is 25 years. It's not that way everywhere else in the nation. Go to Texas and get life, or get a capital crime. They fucking got the death penalty so much they got fucking drive-throughs for it, man. We're fucking doing 5 a day, motherfuckers. But not in Indiana. So it's different from state to state.
Which, again, there's not much I ever envied Texas on, but that's one of them. Put in the express lane in every state. That's all I'm saying.
A capital crime is a capital crime, and every state has had the ability to vote for or against. Serenity, she lives in a state that is against capital punishment. I live in a state that's against capital punishment. Chris, I think that your state still has it, but they don't use it.
I think it's an extreme rare case they'll actually issue to death. 9 times out of 10, it's life without parole.
In California, obviously there is no capital punishment. That's the reason Charles Manson was able to live for fucking 70 years on death row. All of these states have these different interpretations of it. And that's what allows us to operate from state to state. That's why there's a Wyoming and a Indiana and a Pennsylvania and a Florida and a Colorado. If we did it all nationwide the exact same, there'd be no difference in the states. It wouldn't be the United States of America. It'd be the United Republic of America. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that makes the United States different than the rest of the world. And do we have to agree on it? No, don't live in Minnesota. If you don't agree with how they interpret that law, So, not to be a dick about it, but I mean, it's just that simple. If you don't like the way Minnesota interprets their rules and you like the way Wyoming does it, that's the reason they have fucking U-Haul, motherfucker. Move.
Oh, a whole city in Colorado is joining Wyoming. I mean, like,
right.
The city just doesn't like our rules and likes their rules better, so they're joining Wyoming.
So do you think they should have held the trial in a different state?
I think that they could have invoked that, but it wouldn't have moved it from the state. It would have just moved it to a different precinct or a different area of the state.
See,
and I think that
good,
because it's not a national, it's not a federal crime. It was a state crime.
Yeah, the way everybody was rioting, it sounded like it.
I think he could have gotten a fair trial, even in Minnesota. I think what had ruined the fair trial aspect, and again, this is a personal opinion, but you guys will either agree with me or not. I think the court system, and especially the jury, was absolutely coerced, and the reason I believe that they were absolutely coerced, and I don't necessarily mean Maxine Waters, although she's a contributing factor, is the fact that the trial was public. They could have gotten a fair trial if they could have gotten a fair trial if they would have shut the fucking doors until after the verdict was rendered, and then let the national news medias and everything else know what had happened inside the courtroom.
One of the juries were threatened, weren't they?
I don't know.
So that brings up our next line of questioning on this. Now that we've gone through all of these different facts and we've gone through all of these different presentations, even though one of the videos was withheld from evidence, the pre-cop call, the 6 minutes and 30 seconds of video that shows George Floyd outside of the store being incoherent, being whacked out of his fucking mind, that was not admissible. And then the video of him being in police custody, supposedly walking.
Question on the 6-minute video again, because I have never seen the 6-minute video.
It's on Google.
My question is, why was it not admissible? Like, what was their reasonings for it to not be admissible? Because it proves the demeanor of the suspect.
You want to know why? Is because there is no timestamp on the camera footage.
Oh, Jesus Christ!
And it's speculatory too, because everyone could judge that differently.
Right. It does not go to show because there was no interaction with the public. It was him by himself, and there was no timestamp on the video.
It still
so
shows
it was not admissible because they couldn't prove it happened then, and there wasn't anybody else around to corroborate that's how he was actually acting.
All right. Well, fair enough on this timestamp, but I think it definitely speaks to his mindset before the interactions with the police. If he was already whacked out of his mind.
If you have a video of me wobbling around drunk in the house, you're going to know I'm drunk in the fucking house because you can tell by the way I'm wobbling drunk around the fucking house.
Right.
And that's what this video shows. But it wasn't allowed in the court. So now we go into the whole sentencing part of it. The trial is taking place. We have all of these public forums going on, all of these meetings. We have BLM coming on the scene. We have Maxine Waters coming on the scene. We have all of these advocates for and against. And in the meantime, Georgia passes their new law about voter rights and ID, and everybody calls it racist. And in the middle of downtown Atlanta, Nazis came and marched. But nobody really talked about that. Everybody's focused on Maxine Waters and the fucking NAACP, basically open-handedly threatening the jury and the state that repercussions will be had.
Oh, it wasn't even subtle. And not to get off topic or tangent for a minute here, but back in January 6th or November 6th, whatever it was, when Donald Trump gave his rally before the Capitol building, and then and then people fucking stormed it. People stormed the Capitol building and everything else. They impeached Donald Trump for a speech that did not incite violence. It was open for interpretation, but he did not actually verbatim.
He did say go peacefully.
Yeah, he said go peacefully and exercise your exercise your rights. Maxine Waters has literally said if we do not get a guilty vote, we need to be more aggressive, more in your face, and show them we mean business. She has literally called to action the mob.
And so, and there's one big difference here between these two conversations. And just to play devil's advocate, because we both agree on Donald on a lot of things. And
well, the point that I was just going to say is that Donald Trump was fucking impeached for insinuational statements, where Maxine Waters is blatantly putting it out there, and nobody's doing anything about it.
So here's the key differences in those two speeches being made. And again, I'm playing devil's advocate on this. Okay, so what's the difference in political office between Maxine Waters and Donald Trump?
Right and left wing, or conservative,
no,
liberal, or
no,
Republican, Democrat.
Donald Trump is a president, and Maxine Waters is a what?
I don't agree with that. That doesn't matter. It's still public service, and quite honestly, I mean, again, besides using the blatant words that Maxine Waters did, unlike Donald Trump, she was standing in the middle of an already volatile crowd where Donald was speaking at a political rally.
But does Maxine Waters hold office in Minnesota?
No. That makes it even worse. Okay. She holds an office in San Francisco, comes to Minnesota to rile up the riots.
Okay, so there's a little bit of separation there. And then the second form of separation is, if not anything else, would a president's duty not be to unify the country in times of turmoil?
Agreed. And he tried to do that until they closed out all his social media accounts.
Donald could have simply came out and said, "Hey, everybody, this is not the way to do it. Go home. We're going to figure it out in court."
He
not
did.
until after the rioting had already happened.
Yeah, well, no, during the rioting, that was when his Twitter account was suspended. He released a video telling people to go home. This isn't the way. And I think we lost Rudder here for a second. But he
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
That was Mike.
Oh, Mike dropped. Okay. Because of the fact that he released a video on Twitter calling for peace, calling for people to go home. This isn't the way to do it. And as he dropped that video is when Twitter decided to silence his account.
Right.
Permanent silence. So he did try to call an end to it during the riots.
During the riot, but before the riots had ever stopped, he could have stopped it. Whereas Maxine is trying to actually incite action outside of her precinct.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the two could. You're missing the point. I'm thinking that the Donald Trump impeachment was completely motivated by bipartisan lines and separation, whereas Maxine Waters was encouraged because she represented the crowd.
No, I agree with you, and she also represents the what's the term I'm looking for here? The political aspirations of the left wing, which are using things like BLM and Antifa as a tool.
The line of separation again, yeah, and it's just like some of the things that have happened with COVID and everything. You look at anti-maskers; they're predominantly conservative. You look at people who want to lock down everything; they're predominantly liberal or Democratic. And these are very horrible lines in the sand that have been drawn, that have happened over the past 5 or 6 years, and now have led way to this whole cancel culture and everything. Whereas the four of us having this kind of a discourse, even though I'm trying to moderate it in a line by line kind of a way to keep us from being pulled into what's going to happen tomorrow whenever all the talking heads come out with all their shows and everything. Trying to keep that from happening so that way we don't get pulled in as being bigots and racist. We're still going to be, even though I'm trying very hard to make sure that we have a very linear discussion about it, because of the fact that we're saying that Maxine Waters incited reaction. It's going to be that way.
Yeah, in that statement and viewpoint, I absolutely agree. Of course, now we got Mike back, and of course, Serenity's been here. I'd love to get their points of view on it, because I know what you and I think, but we haven't really talked to them on what they think of that particular situation.
The Donald Trump speech and the Maxine, the difference?
Well, I mean, even if it's not the Donald Trump thing, just as far as the actions of people like Maxine Waters during this.
I don't think that anyone should be allowed to incite any sort of violence, but, I mean, they're saying that it's a call to action and it should be all right for her to do it, but I still think that it's on the line of, you're inciting people to do harm to others.
See, and this is that fine line, right, Micah? If you're listening to all of this and you're listening to somebody who's using their right to free speech and they're talking on things even though they're invoking emotion, do they or do they not have the right to sway people's decisions one way or the other using their free speech for somebody who is really only able to listen to what's going on?
I respect free speech, but I also know when free speech is being abused. And the words that she used did incite violence because, getting in somebody's face, get on the streets even more. Even last summer, she did the same thing and told people to get in people's faces. And this time she got reprimanded for it. And I'm really glad about it. But I think she did cross the line. And honestly, I think, and this is my personal opinion, because like you said, from what I hear and everything else, but the words that she used, that was inciting violence. And to me, that would call for impeachment.
Well, exactly, because what a lot of people may not understand, and they should understand, is freedom of speech is not an infinitely absolute thing. You can say whatever you want, but you can't say something that would incite a call to action. For example, I could say that Mike is a mullet head, for example. It doesn't matter that his feelings get hurt or otherwise. No, Mike, I'm not saying that. I'm just using it as an example. But I cannot, however, turn around and say, hey, Chris, you should punch Mike in the face because I don't like him. Because now I'm calling Chris to action that if he actually does it, I incited that violence, which makes me liable for it.
So that's also based on new interpretation of free speech. In the 1970s, that was not the case. Whenever people rioted and marched on the Washington Monument against the Vietnam War and they spit on our veterans, none of their speech was considered call to action. This is a new interpretation of free speech. This is not the true interpretation of free speech. And that's the point I'd like to make. Free speech is free speech. You can't have your cake and eat it too. We cannot say that Donald didn't incite violence and then called it off during the middle of the violence, yet Maxine is wrong for calling for violence.
Yeah, but Donald, though...
You can't have it both ways.
Donald, though, his speech ended before the riot even started.
Right, but he still made a call.
But he also said go peacefully. Now, Maxine Waters said get in their faces and let them know that we are going to be heard. To me, that's a lot stronger terminology.
It's a difference. It's a difference in terminology, but you're still talking free speech. Free speech is free speech, regardless of what it incites. It is not until action is taken that it becomes something else.
And the thing is, action was taken. When she did this earlier in 2020, over the summer, she gave that almost exact same speech to the rioters, and they took it to action. How come she didn't get punished then?
Yeah, people all of a sudden started getting hit with concrete milkshakes and everything else for wearing MAGA hats.
This is the other. It's the other side of the hat of you can't have your cake and eat it too. Okay, I'm not saying one's right and one's wrong. I'm just saying that free speech is still free speech. I can say whatever the fuck I want. I can say you shoot your mouth off like a motherfucker who doesn't care about getting his mouth shot off by a motherfucker you don't know. That doesn't mean I'm going to shoot you.
No, not at all. Because that had nothing to tell me that you were going to shoot me. You were just telling me I was being mouthy.
But I'm also using terms of violence. Because it's free speech, you can't say shit about that. You can interpret it however you want to, but you can't say shit about it.
But at the same time, there is a causality to what she said, because she said it before the deliberation of the verdict. And she put an ultimatum on the court systems through the media and through the violent mob that she was standing in the middle of She gave an ultimatum that if you do not give a guilty plea, we will tear this fucker down. So she literally influenced the outcome.
I'm gonna try to tie this up into a neat little bow, and then I'm gonna drop my gavel. The reason we are so mad at Maxine Waters is because she holds political office and she took an oath to protect and to serve. So did Chauvin. I'm done.
No, that's fair, and we'll get into the verdict and what we think of the verdict and everything else here in a minute. Right now, we're still talking, but we'll still talk about Maxine. We'll still talk about the causality. Okay. We'll still talk about the causality of people like and not just Maxine Waters, but people like Maxine Waters, the mainstream media, other members of the left like AOC, who was quoted on many times speaking on the George Floyd case and the Chauvin case,
right?
And stuff like that. All of their statements, causality, actions have consequences. Everything they said influenced and swayed those jurors, that judge, and everything else to turn around and say, if we don't act accordingly, we are going to have a bad situation on our hands. That is extortion.
Can we not say that the same causality happened with Chauvin's actions on George Floyd's neck?
No, because it wasn't racially motivated. You cannot prove to me beyond a shadow of a doubt that this guy killed George Floyd because he was black. There's zero evidence to it.
That's a good statement there.
That is a good statement. Like I said, I'll drop my gavel on that one. I'm just saying they both took the same oath to protect and to serve the public that they represent.
Now, here's a theory that I came up with a long time ago, and this is my own conspiracy theory of the whole thing. The Democrats wanted Trump out of the office so bad that they actually had an Antifa cop in where they needed him to be, and the right moment
for the riot,
for the right time, he killed George Floyd just to give them the upper edge. And that was my conspiracy theory at the end, that he was actually Antifa.
Can I make a quick suggestion, Stolle?
Yeah.
Can we make an edit mark here, and we're getting ready to go into the conspiracy of everything, and I'm more than open to have the discussion, but we need to separate these two topics.
Okay.
We cannot have them both together. These are two different conversations.
I will agree with that, but before I hit the edit mark and stop here, for that edit mark, I will say I want to rebut Mike here. I don't think he was Antifa. I don't think his actions specifically were designed to push a particular narrative. But my conspiracy theory is that they used this to push a political or what's the word? Sociological narrative
and now I want
in
to push
the future.
The edit button.
Right, now I'll push the edit button. But I just wanted to disagree that I don't think Chauvin himself was a political pawn. I think what he did was used as a political ploy.
No, I think so. Are we moving into another segment?
Let me hit stop.